Dead Rising has always been a game that has been beloved to some players while completely alienating others, and the game got in that position by offering a sort of challenge that's frustrating but also not really offered anywhere else in video games. They're kind of, but not quite open worlds where the player is under the gun of a timer constantly ticking down to zero. During that time, there are a few story missions that the player absolutely needs to beat at regular intervals if they want the story to continue, but aside from that, they can explore, play dress-up, save civilians, or play minigames like gambling or take pictures. Your time is yours, but you need to spend it wisely because you can't get it back. It's a game that takes decision-making super seriously, so much so that the original game only had one save slot. If you regret that you chose to screw around in the sporting goods store rather than save the civilian Otis let you know about, you either need to reload your last save from however long ago it was that you last saved, or you need to let your failure go and move on. And to prevent save scumming, Dead Rising forced you to actually make your way to a bathroom, and in a game where you're already constantly pressed for time, that means the act of saving itself has a cost. So smart and aggressive players tend to do it less, except that means when you do screw up, your last save is that much further back. Then, in what is perhaps the biggest flaw of the first few games, experience gained is kept across saves because the assumption was you weren't going to be able to see the end of the game the first time through, or the second time through, or maybe even your third or fourth times through. This above everything else is one of the quirks of the game's design that I think alienates the most players right off the bat. It's stressful enough to force a single save where there's a constant time pressure and all failures are permanent, but to expect players to repeat the opening few hours over and over and over again until they've gained enough XP and knowledge of the missions and mall layout to realistically finish the game has always felt a little mean-spirited. It's like the game is wasting your time by intentionally starting you way too weak and a few playthroughs later turning you into a god, and while I love this franchise, that's always been a valid criticism of the way it forces you to play. It starts like a scrappy game of Don't Starve style survival, and ends feeling almost like a Dynasty Warriors 1 versus billions melee brawl. So along comes Dead Rising 4 with the hopes of alleviating all of those long-standing and often valid criticisms, and the result is not so good. Developer Capcom Vancouver haven't really fixed any of the problems inherent with the design of Dead Rising, so much as they've tossed all of the core tenets of what makes a Dead Rising game out the window. For example, the emphasis on player levels is way reduced, and you can definitely beat the game your first time through now. And that's probably a good change overall, but it's taken to an extreme. Leveling has gone from almost the sole defining metric of player survivability to a fluffy series of perks that don't really matter. Bear with me here because I know Dark Souls comparisons are overdone, but the first game felt like it had the progression of a clunkier, broken-y Dark Souls. You'd make some progress and along the way die and lose that progress, but each time you'd come back with some more knowledge and some more power. But the ratios are kind of reversed. In Dark Souls you came back with way more knowledge on what to do and how to survive and what the timing was for all the various combat stuff, and maybe a few stat buffs. But in Dead Rising, you might learn where one or two useful objects are, or how to shave a couple seconds off of your route, but really it's the stat buffs themselves that carry you forward to the next level. And again, I can see how that's frustrating to players, and how that system is in desperate need of reworking, but that whole Dark Souls clawing your way forward each iteration thing got cut entirely, and in its place are a series of perks that just add a couple percentage points to damage or to health granted by items. It's not that those perks don't help, but they're also kinda fluff. A broken but interesting system has now been replaced with a kind of empty nothing system, and that seems to be the order of the day with Dead Rising 4. Also absent is the ubiquitous timer, which is sort of a franchise-defining mechanic. You can now explore the world at your leisure. And that sounds cool, right? Take your time, play those mini-games, take in the sights, explore all the stores. Except Dead Rising 4 isn't really that kind of an open world game. It's never been a franchise about wandering around and making up your own story or doing side quests for side factions, and Dead Rising 4 doesn't really backfill any of that stuff to make the freed up open world worthwhile. In fact, it arguably has less stuff going on at once than previous games did. Where the original Dead Rising puts objectives to take out violent human survivors, save innocent human survivors, and complete multiple story missions all on your docket all at once and watch the time tick down on all of them, Dead Rising 4 is content to suggest some side missions while pointing you to your singular next real story objective. The result isn't an opened up and deeper Dead Rising that the open world really provides, but instead a sense that the gameplay has been flattened. What was a series of tense choices and trade-offs between self-preservation, core story progress, and side missions you needed to get done for the good ending has now become some arrows on your mini-map that are just waiting for you, whenever you're done screwing around in that sporting goods store. These sorts of changes have been a long time coming as the Japanese influence over the franchise has slowly waned and Capcom Vancouver has taken over. Each iteration of the game has been less quirky but more accessible, less frustrating but more banal. Like its predecessor, Dead Rising 4 has done away with the idea of having to save your game manually. As you make progress through story missions or complete major tasks, the game will just save automatically. This is convenient, but combined with the lack of a timer means you no longer have to bother to plan ahead. Saving is no longer a strategic action or something you do right before a boss fight, but instead it's something that happens after a boss is finally defeated automatically. With no timer ticking down and no possibility of losing all your progress and having to start the whole game over, all saves really do is demark achievement so that you can continue from that point the next time you load the game. Again, interesting but flawed system, boring empty replacement. Saving survivors was a core mechanic in the first two games that was your most reliable way of gaining experience and thus gaining survivability. They also used to be a frustrating series of escort missions. But it also made good use of the time mechanic. Bigger crowds are harder to defend, but can save you time by letting you make a single trip back to base. There was a tension in looking over at a couple trapped in a store, seeing that you had maybe 10 real-life minutes left to get back to them, and deciding to carry on without them anyways because it was just too risky since you already had a couple people with you. And the survivors weren't proc-gen randos, but each had their own name and model, their own time they'd become available to save, and their own time they would die if you didn't act. Now they're just random events you have the option of looking into as you drive by, and once you clear the zombies immediately surrounding them, they run off while completely unarmed and without any help from you.
Phew. I'm heading back to the shelter where it's safe.
Look, there's no other way to say it. Dead Rising 4 has taken a distinct gameplay aesthetic that definitely didn't appeal to everyone but certainly had character and charms all of its own, and has replaced it with a standard generic Western open world game. It really does feel like for every interesting Dead Rising mechanic they quote-unquote fixed by just chucking it out or cutting it down to nothing, they threw in another bog-standard Ubisoft design trope. Random collectibles that mean nothing and make no sense in the world of the game, but let us say we've added an hour or two of content? That's in there. And before you bring up the PP stickers in the original game as a collectible, I'd point out that A, they're encouraging you to take photos of different landmarks rather than the exact same graffiti over and over again, and B, were used to help you learn your way around them all based on those landmarks back when effective spatial navigation really mattered due to the time limit. Assassin's Creed-style towers that unlock maps and stores in an area once you've cleared it? Yep, those would be the safe houses.
Welcome.
Pointless detective mode that isn't even half as good as the Arkham games, made worse by the fact that you're a photojournalist doing all of this with a magic camera filter? Yep, that's a mechanic they lean on a weird amount for some reason.
Something you want to say?
Always.
Exosuits as temporary power-ups we can sometimes require full-time for boss or story missions. I hear those are really popular in open-world games right now. A stealth mode, complete with takedowns to use against human soldiers?
What are you doing? Frank? Oh my god. You killed him?
What? No, he's just sleeping.
Oh.
Yeah, sure, screw it, why not? It's such a hodgepodge of uninventive and obvious mechanics that I spent a good long while expecting there to be some sort of Saints Row-style metatextual commentary about AAA games, especially with the Black Friday setting and comedy tone, but it just isn't there. Really, the Christmas stuff feels like the dev team either really liked Arkham Origins or are just real big fans of Shane Black movies. It's an aesthetic choice more or less completely devoid of commentary, which is just odd for a game franchise that originated as a nod to George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. Look, Dead Rising has never been particularly deep or biting satire. After all, Romero was minding the whole zombies in a mall as metaphor for materialistic consumption thing 40 years ago, back when malls were relevant, and in 2016, yeah, not so much. But what Dead Rising brought to that formula, if anything, was an intimacy with the items of consumption themselves. Aside from the time pressure forcing all of your decisions to carry weight, the other star of the first few Dead Rising games were the items. You used to be able to melee attack and ranged attack with all of the items, and a lot of the game was figuring out what the best way to use each item really was. Bowling balls, for example, could be cracked against zombie skulls, or you could go bowling for zombies. You could throw a shower head at a zombie and it doesn't really do much, but if you plop it on its head, it rained blood until they died. They weren't always good weapons, but it was a good way to inject some of the game's comedy, and it made you curious about what the sort of interactions a given object would have. Everybody knows what it means to use a machete or a pistol as a weapon, but what does it mean to hit zombies with a coat rack, or throw a cash register at someone's head, or pummel the undead with teddy bonkers? How could you use a lawn dart or a frying pan as a weapon, and how effective would they be? Exploring consumer goods as weapons was itself sort of the point of the game. That's why it was set in a mall, to maximize their variety. It's not a shooter or a beat-em-up per se, it's a Home Alone-style fantasy of self-defense by way of what you have sitting around you. With Dead Rising 4, most of that item focus and creativity is gone. There's been a move away from wacky uses of common items and towards super durable crafting items. Because of course there's a crafting system, and now Dead Rising 4 has one tropey open world game designer bingo. These combo items dominate combat, and combined with much higher zombie counts and a bigger focus on fighting in general, make even considering toying with squirt guns or whatever a waste of time. Worse, Dead Rising 4 once again sacrifices engaging strategic choices for a uniform play experience by making sure you're always a capable player. Items are no longer interesting experiments where you try and see how they act as weapons. Instead, they instantly fit into one of three categories: melee, thrown, or ranged, so each item in the game is now a unitasker that can only fulfill one role, greatly reducing the interest in the items that drove the franchise to begin with. In previous games, do I drop my only gun for this good melee weapon or this needed health pack was a harrowing choice, because you wanted the range but more often needed to hit things or to heal. Here it's a non-issue because you have these separate inventory slots and can hold a little bit of everything all at once. Also, I don't know why, but you can't see the healing items you pick up. You just know how many health items you have, but you can't swap between them, even though, say, a medkit grants more health than a bag of chips. I mean, I know it's just a usability issue, but in the first few games, swapping out, say, a chocolate bar for a bottle of orange juice was really smart strategy, and here you can't really do that. It's all just a shot in the dark. Let's play, is the health thing I'm holding worse than the health thing I'm about to pick up? Oh, drinking bottled water to pick up snacks? That's not good. Alright, round 2, points are doubled, let's go!
Somebody! Anybody!
Oh, I drank a soda so that I could pick up some muscle relaxers. That's actually a good choice, I think. Hooray! Again, interesting but maybe flawed inventory system replaced with something that's straightforward but lacks depth. Anyways, in the original Dead Rising, the emphasis on a limited inventory space and limited item durability also meant that you were regularly in need of items, and each time you went out to complete a mission or get more survivors, you'd end up coming up with a shopping list of things you needed. Oh, I'm gonna be over in this part of the mall, so let me be sure to swing by the food court and get some orange juice for health, and then I need to grab a bowling ball or maybe a chainsaw to do some decent damage since mine are almost broken, and on the way back I can get that survivor if I do this fast enough. It was a weird shopping list motivated plan of attack. Again, it's not deep commentary or really even commentary at all, but a fun perversion of the idea of a trip to the mall for some items you need. But once again, Dead Rising 4 has more or less made these shopping trips irrelevant. First, crafted weapons have an obscene level of durability compared to vanilla items, which means that the constant inventory jockeying of the previous games is played way down. It's why you almost always see me with a crafted weapon in this footage. It cuts durability and inventory management issues down to a once every half an hour thing instead of a constant pressure like in the previous games. Second, with the addition of vendors at safe houses, you can just buy whatever you need in order to craft those super durable items. Yeah, zombies drop scrap now so that you can buy items from vendors from safe houses. Again, very generic open world, and I hate it, but whatever. And finally, with no time limit and dynamic saves each time you do anything of value, there's no reason to sit in a safe house and come up with a plan of attack. That loop of go out, do some missions, get some stuff, and bring survivors back to the safe house is completely gone, so there really is no planning anymore, just following arrows to your next objective. Again, standard open world crap. You've done this a million times in a million other games, under a million other names with a million other characters. If there's one positive thing I can say about the game, it's that they've largely fixed Dead Rising 3's tone problems. Dead Rising has always been a goofy comedy horror game that's mixed violence and the darker sides of human nature with dressing up like a servbot from Mega Man and hitting zombies with plastic swords. But Dead Rising 3 decided to toy with the comedy horror mix by leaning hard into some grindhouse film aesthetics, and the results were kind of uncomfortable.
If you don't listen to me, then I'm going to be one angry daddy!
And mean-spirited.
Are you calling me?
Oh shit.
And transphobic?
God, you're good looking. You know that? You winner, you.
You know, you really are indeed gigantic, sir.
Ah, not a sir. Man, no, you are not going to beat me. I am Miss Gigantic California.
And racist.
Spirit of the universe has slaughtered my happiness, and so I must slaughter too.
Stand your proud quality.
Got this, man.
The angel of death smiles upon my wicked soul. And I feel the cold dead hands reaching.
The comedy in Dead Rising 3 was driven by these awful, offensive caricatures, and combined with the newly dingy look of the game, the whole thing just left me feeling dirty while playing it. Dead Rising 4 has thankfully fixed all that, and returned to a more traditional horror comedy vibe where Frank West is the doofus and the rest of the world is the straight man.
What the shit was that?
The monster? Frank! Hey, come on! Get me out of here!
Sit tight, Darcy. You'll be safe here. Probably.
What? Hey, you can't leave me here! Come on, man!
There's actually a lot of Ash Williams in this incarnation of Frank West, a self-absorbed ass who hurts pretty much everyone he comes in contact with, but is the best he is at what he does.
On that note,
Oh, hey, hold up. My guys have taken a hit. They need a ride back to Tom.
yeah, sorry. Wish I could. Got things to do.
He really is an asshole.
And when they lean into Frank's doofy, terrible human beingness, the game's often legitimately funny.
Who wants barbecue? No? No one?
Holy shit, Frank. This is some atrocity level shit going on here, and the best you can do is crack wise?
That is unfair. I have photographed things and thought about things.
That said, with all that's been removed, what are we left with? Basically a pretty janky third-person action game that occasionally has some really good funny bits, and a seasonally appropriate setting that it does nothing with. Dead Rising has never had great combat, but that was always okay because, again, it was more about messing with the items and the time management. It never needed to be Bayonetta because it wasn't about the slashy, sword-fighty, gunfighty stuff. But now all of that other stuff is gone, all we're left with is the smash X to swing sword at hordes of zombies combat. It sort of reminds me of what happened to the Shock series. A game about rig building and problem solving slowly gave way to combat as a sole focus for a game that was never really about that to disastrous results. And I really can't tell how the series got here. On one hand, this game does not show the obvious scars of a project gone haywire like Destiny or The New Thief, and it's not like the turn towards generic Western open-world design is coming out of nowhere. You can see it encroaching in the previous two games. But there's a lot of recycled content from the previous game, including clothing and weapons and textures, and there's way fewer combo weapons than in Dead Rising 3, around 100 versus around 50, and human opponents have no cutscenes or real on-screen presence, unlike... yeah, those guys. So maybe it was rushed for the holiday season instead of having the time to percolate. I don't know. But as a longtime fan of the Dead Rising franchise, all I see is a series that has had its mechanical identity, warts and all, slowly replaced Ship of Theseus style with some of the most insipid and uninspired systems and ideas of the past 10 years. I liked Dead Rising, I loved Dead Rising 2, I really couldn't stand Dead Rising 3's tone, and I hate playing Dead Rising 4. Maybe it's the snooty game critic in me, but I'll take game systems with frustrating quirks but an identity all of their own over generic third-person action game mush every single time. Dead Rising 4 isn't terrible, it plays okay. But like the zombies it asks you to kill, it's a shambling corpse of something that used to have personality and a sense of self. And like its zombies, it now just roams storefronts as a not quite coherent symbol of holiday consumption. Merry Christmas.
Seen nothing yet. It feels like Christmas time all through the year. Oh,